Hello and welcome back here at Feeling Terrific. Today I have a special guest with me because he was referred to me as a brilliant mind. So let's see what this brilliant mind will tell us today, right? And what this person is all about. So I have with me today Skylar Steuter. So quite an interesting background, at least for me, you have. So really curious to dig a little bit deeper into it. And let's see what the other person meant when he said, Christian, you have to talk to him. And first of all, also thank you for taking the time, right? Because, it's always also a time invest to have this conversation. So thank you for that. Maybe a few words from me about you, but I mean, who can describe yourself as you better as yourself? So I'm not talking too much about it, but you're currently a creator, builder, founder of of what actually, right? So let's see what this means. And today we will talk about different topics, right? And among them about your transition, from a big tech company to entrepreneurship. And let's see what this conversation will all about. So thank you for your time, Skylar. Really appreciate it. And over to you for the first question. Who are you?
Well, first of all, Christian, thanks so much for the invitation. And I will try to hold up to the standard of the brilliant minds that have already been on your podcast. So thanks for the kind words there. I'm Skylar. It's very nice to meet everyone. And I've not been on too many podcasts so far, so I'm really excited for that. And also, by the way, thanks, Christian, for still being online at like your 6 something p.m. because I'm in California right now. Christian is in Germany. So it's for me in the morning. But to kind of quickly introduce me again, I'm Skylar. I done a bunch of different things that we can speak about. I'm originally from Germany and moved to the US when I was 18 for studies. After that, started working with LinkedIn, exploring entrepreneurship. Then 2 months ago, I left my corporate job at LinkedIn to start exploring entrepreneurship, which is what I'm in the middle and in the start of, which is pretty wild but fun so far. I guess everything else we get into the middle of in this call.
Yeah, no, that was quite a good intro, and thank you for that. Maybe let's add on it, right? So you just also mentioned it that you moved to the US with 18 and to study, right? So studying abroad in Miami. Why and how come?
As you mentioned, as I mentioned, I moved there with 18, and but there's a little more background to that because obviously that's not just a quick decision you make, even though it kind of ended up being a like spontaneous small thing that I did. But my background is that my whole family is German, my whole family really. But my parents, they lived in the US for 2 years, not long, and then I was born there, which is why I have a US citizenship, right? But my mother moved back with me to Germany when I was just a few months old, and then grew up in Germany my whole life in a small town in West Germany called Solingen. Now then I just really, normal went to high school in Germany, finished that when I was 18, and then after that, that is kind of when stuff started being a little more interesting, because then I was like, hey, I'm still a US citizen. Before I accept or decide to go to a university in Germany, I at least want to see universities over in the US, right? Before I make a decision. And at that point, again, though, I was 18. I did not speak English. I didn't know anyone in the US. I've never been back besides being born there, right? So for me, that 1 week trip to see universities, it really in my head was, okay, I'm going to be there, like have fun a week in, Miami, like have vacation, blah, 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 whatever, and then go back to Germany and study. But then when I went there, for me personally, it was very an eye-opening experience to see how education and university just can work differently in different countries, right? And for me, having that passion always since I was young in entrepreneurship and innovation and trying to explore that, um, and then seeing the universities over there really pushing that and really trying to create an environment for entrepreneurship is really what fascinated me and then made me decide to not take my flight back from back to Germany and actually stay and try to see if I somehow can study at the university there, right? And that is kind of how that decision making process went. And again, I was 18, so looking back at that, it's still kind of crazy and to think about like how that all happened. but it all ended very like lucky and well, and it was all a lot of risk taking in there. But then I started studying in January 2018 at the University of Miami in Florida. And yeah, looking back at that, I always say it was one of the most uncomfortable things I've done so far because of the things that I shared. Because I didn't know one, I didn't know English. It took a while for me to actually become good at English too. But on the other hand, it was one of the best things because I learned how much you can gain and grow with if you're uncomfortable, right? And then I kept doing that in my life, I think, because of that experience.
Yeah. No, it sounds like a life learning session, if I can call it
Yeah.
like that. And yeah, I'm happy for you because I think having such yeah experiences just yeah let's let you grow also as a person, right? As you also mentioned. But I'm curious. I mean, it sounds like that the whole yeah experience or decision was worth it, right? So that you would do it again. But I mean, it's kind of obvious or also well known that it's quite expensive to study in the US, right? How did you manage that?
Yeah, so I come kind of like I shared. I grew up in, like in Germany with my mom, so it was a single parent kind of situation, and she did a really amazing job on like, managing that, like trying to take care of me, but also like working part-time job and like still having enough time for both and all by herself, right? So congrats to my mom there. But on the other hand, going to a University of Miami, I think at the time was like $20,000 per semester, and now today I think it's like 25 or even more $1,000 per semester. So it's around $50,000 a year, without any housing or anything like that. That's just tuition. And going there, coming from a background where we never, had a lot. I was just a U.S. citizen, really. Was an interesting experience because when I first applied to University of Miami and got accepted, it doesn't work that way that they then tell you necessarily. Sometimes that happens, but for me, that wasn't the case. They didn't tell me how much support and scholarship and financial aid and stuff like that I would get, right? So it was a big gamble. It was kind of like, me, I will just start and I will try to do my best there and try to show them that I'm motivated and hope that they're going to just increase the support and the scholarships they give me. And so for me, I did that in a couple of different ways, but I think first one was just to be involved on campus. And that was one thing that was special about the US universities for me too. In my first semester, or between my first and second semester, I co-founded an entrepreneurship club on campus that's called U Start. And I also was engaged in a bunch of other organizations. I tried to keep my grades up, all of those kind of things. And then after my first semester, they really increased the amount of scholarships and aid and all of that kind of stuff. That at the end of the day, then with me continuing doing good, they also continued to support me. And then at the end of the day, I graduated that university. And again, I'm like really open to talk about that kind of stuff, with around like 20 or so ish $1,000 in student loans, which sounds still and is a lot of money and sounds like a lot of money, right? But compared to the cost that the university have and the opportunities and the like things that I've seen there, for me, I say personally that was definitely worth it.
Yeah, and it was also the case that you were the co-founder of the first and only entrepreneurship club at Miami. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was fun because it was, kind of like I told you, I moved to the US, and to that university. I started there because I was so passionate about them having all those things for entrepreneurship. And I don't know in Germany or in Europe how that works, but in the US, you kind of have to decide a specialization of your studies. So I, for example, went to the business school of the University of Miami, but then you have to pick a specialization that you do. So my bachelor's was a bachelor of business administration. But you still have to pick that specialization. And for me, that was able to be entrepreneurship, right? Which I was very excited about. So you would specifically take classes for that track. So you would, for example, have a class where the whole class really it would be once a week. It would be, I think, 2.5 hours long on like Wednesday, later in the day. And it would really just consist of entrepreneurs that are alumni of the university or that are around the area. For me, that was Miami, that come to class just tell their story, speak about their experience. And those were like small entrepreneurs that just started, but those were sometimes also large entrepreneurs, sometimes even entrepreneurs that I met there in those classes that went to Shark Tank, for those that are familiar with you. And for us students, it was great because we were just able to ask questions, right? And like learn from them and connect with those individuals. And there's still some of them that I'm still connected to this day, right? That motivated me a lot to step into entrepreneurship. But to actually answer your question, one thing that happened is that I then wanted to join an entrepreneurship club as well, right? And they just didn't have really a specific student society for entrepreneurship. And first, that was a little sad for me because I moved to the US, I did all that stuff, and then there was no club for that. But then on the second thought, then I sat down with a couple of friends of mine that I started meeting and get to know that kind of had similar thoughts, and that's how we then started UStart together. And I think that was in the fall 2018, and that was a really fun experience because I got to just really learn about a lot about leadership. And my role really at UStart was the person that tried to connect to new entrepreneurs that were around the university or connected to university in some kind of way, and tried to bring them to UStart and collaborate with UStart, collaborate with the members of UStart, become parts of events at UStart, try to hire people for internships from UStart at their startups, all of those kind of things. And that was a great experience and one of my first touch points really of getting to know entrepreneurs, their story, their background, and all of that.
Yeah. I'm curious, what would you say, what was the impact of this experience? I mean, you scratched a little bit, right? But on you personally, but also on your decision to become an entrepreneur?
That's a good question. It was a big one. I think the biggest part was what I just shared, which is, me being able to have very close relationships with entrepreneurs, right? All different kinds of entrepreneurs. And what that brought to me is that seeing all those entrepreneurs doing various things in different industries, different sizes, but having one thing in common that kind of caught my attention, which was that a lot of them had background in sales, right? And that is what really got me into sales and interested into sales. And that's how I then kind of started focusing on the sales career, right? Because I realized entrepreneurship, at least from my experience now, is very similar to sales in a sense where you always have to sell yourself, your business, your idea, your goals, everything like that. And you're also very autonomous in sales or in entrepreneurship, right? Which is the reason why that experience at UStart got me interested not just in entrepreneurship, but also in sales. And then I continued, and we can get more into that, I continued gaining experience in sales, then ended up working at LinkedIn in sales, and now doing entrepreneurship where I take all that experience from sales into my entrepreneurial ideas. And so far it's been really, really helpful, I think.
Yeah, and maybe one comment from my side. So I think you made a really interesting point, and I mean the examples you just told us, right, underlines it also quite well. For example, as everyone know, I'm a recruiter at ServiceNow, right? And usually when I talk to sales candidates, and they ask me, okay, what kind of profile is ServiceNow looking for, right? It might be also a different company than ServiceNow, but it might be ServiceNow. And then I'm answering, most of the time like that we are looking for people with character, but also when it comes to acting like a business owner, right? With accountability, drive, creativity, listening, to listen, but also to ask the right questions, and then being able to add value. And I just can imagine what you will bring in the future when combining the sales skills with the entrepreneurship mindset. So we are curious.
Yeah.
We are curious, definitely. I'm also wondering, maybe from a different perspective, what does intrinsic motivation mean to you?
Yeah, I'll answer that in a second. I also want to comment on what you just said, because I think what is interesting in the US, I don't know if that's similar in Europe. You have to tell me, but oftentimes when I finished college and I was trying to like select or figure out my first full-time role after college, there was obviously like LinkedIn, that I already got a like offer from my internship the summer before I graduated, right? But I actually also wanted to see other companies and see how that looks. So at the end, I had 5 like total like offers, and 4 of them were sales roles, right? But one of them actually was a recruiting consulting role as well. And it was interesting to see that, because I initially didn't even think about it, right? Because I was so focused on sales. But that company, and then later on, I realized a lot of companies, actually recruiting companies, they treat those recruiting roles very similar, like sales roles, right? And once I had those conversations, the interviews and so on, I realized that, yeah, it's really interesting how much, we talked about entrepreneurship is in sales, but then also how similar sales and recruiting actually are, right? Because you really have, again, like you have the candidates, then you have the clients that you work with, you have to manage those relationships, you really have to sell to both sides at the same time, right? Yeah, just want to comment that I find that always very interesting.
Yeah, so if I wouldn't be a recruiter already, I would apply after your speech. So.
Yeah, right. But to answer your other question, so intrinsic motivation, actually always interesting for me is, I told you I moved to the US when I was 18, and that's really how I learned English. I had some English in school, but not good, not
Yeah.
good. And so yeah, exactly. So therefore, every time there's words that are not usually used in like everyday language in English, those are the words I still might have to look up. So that was, for example, one word that I just had to look up, even though I live now in the US since like 4 or 5 years, right? But I think when it's about, kind of like a ground. So I see the question of like, okay, what is your like, what would you explain as, your ground motivation or your basic motivation? Or maybe something that you always kind of had in yourself, right? And so for me, that motivation, I think, always was in a sense to like try to do things differently, or at least question the status quo, right? So question what everybody kind of like thinks is happening or accepts to be like the normal, right? And that was the case, through like when I moved to the US, but that was also the case when then afterwards, like for example, coming back to Germany, or like seeing what other people are doing, or after that I traveled to and studied abroad in Singapore, and then worked and lived in like a couple of more places, especially when it comes to cultures, and also job opportunities and growth. Like I think doing that and questioning the status quo and trying to do things different is like the one big thing that like helped me to do the things I've done and continue to doing like just like things that excite me personally, right?
Yeah. Would you also say that this kind of perspective of yours, right, is helpful also to do a great, job as a founder?
That's a good question. I think so, right? But I think there's so much out there. There's so many different founders out there. There's so many different ideas out there. I think like people can become successful in like very different ways, right? I think for me personally, and I think also in general, you could say, in my opinion, that like being open to new ideas and trying them out to at least see if they work better than what you've known, or if there's maybe a different solution that you can create, right, that can help people, is should be like really helpful to founding and creating something.
Yeah. Would you agree when I say that also attitude plays a big part in, not just within intrinsic motivation, but also attitude as seeing attitude as something which definitely helps you to grow as a person, but also then in a general personal development kind of perspective?
Yeah, and I would strongly agree with that, for me for sure. And I always think for others too, but again, I'm just like 24, so I think I'm still learning a lot, right? But I think one example of that is, when it comes to attitude, I always try to like have a positive mindset and try to believe in positive outcomes, right? And like one example where that was very risky, but like it helped me a lot, right? Was when I, like I told you, I moved to the US. I already had, so before I flew to the US for the week to look at universities, I had university offers from German universities to study there, right? But they really gave me a date by when I have to accept that, right? And say, okay, I study at the university, right? And then I visited the US, then I saw a university there, then I was like, hey, if I can somehow study, I really want to try that. Well, that process also takes some time, right? So then I got to apply, I wrote my essays, did all the application process. But so then they told me, I think it was like a week after, they would give me the decision if I get into University of Miami a week after the deadline that I had to say yes or no to the universities in Germany, right? So at that point, that is kind of where the attitude and the positivity, but maybe also a little recklessness comes into place when I actually declined the offers at the German university, and kind of set all my money on, like hopefully getting into this one university. And then it happened, right? It could have not happened, but in those situations, I'm also telling myself, hey, this is really what I wanted to do. That's why I bet on it in a sense, right? That's why I put my energy towards too. And if it doesn't, maybe it wasn't meant to be at this point, and there's going to be a different, even better, most likely outcome after in some kind of other situation, right?
Yeah, no, I really like the optimistic point of view. How did you feel during this 1 week?
Well, I would lie if I can say that I remember that much of it right now, right? And honestly, it's so wild to still think about back on this time because it sounds so wild, but I like it's so difficult to grasp those emotions still. Like what I can say though, what I definitely remember, is that like maybe it's because in those situations I stayed relatively calm because I was very much like it was an interesting experience because I got there and I saw the universities and in within like basically those moments when I was there, I saw the universities, I spoke to like the administrators, the professors and students and stuff. I really made up my mind already, I think, right? And then it was really like that's gonna happen. This has to happen. This like the way, right? And I think therefore I stayed relatively calm. What I can say though, which was a more difficult experience for me, was more of the cultural aspect of arriving there, like getting used to the culture, learning the language, not being able, and this was maybe the biggest point, not being able to be part of social like gatherings or like social interactions the way I used to know just because of language, right? Because you are just not able at the beginning when you would learn a language to communicate the same way that is the true you, than you are in your native language, right? You can't make jokes as fast. Like you have to translate things in your head, right? All of those things.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, right. So that kind of stuff I had to deal with, and I think that was one of the more difficult things because that also put me in a place where sometimes I definitely felt a little lonely, and had to figure that out, right? But at the end, again, it was like a really great experience for me to go through that more difficult time, right? Because then I was able to do that again and again, like study abroad in Singapore and so on. And that was then a lot easier for me, at least after I did it already once, right?
Yeah. And how did it come then? Maybe jumping a little bit. How did it come? You ending up at LinkedIn?
So kind of speaking about how I got used to the US and tried to get to know people and try to understand and build kind of my footprint over there. One of the ways how I did that and found mentors and found just maybe also other German people in Miami, for example, was actually LinkedIn. So in the US, or at least at my university, one of the first classes you take, like business 101, something like that, one of the assignments back at that time when I was a freshman, so in my first year, was to create a LinkedIn profile, right? And I did that, and that was kind of it though. And then at some point, there was a different class where we should post a LinkedIn post, right? And I shared a little bit about what I'm doing, that I'm a German in the US, that I'm in Miami, and then what was very interesting to me, and that was the first time where I kind of got more into LinkedIn, was that people that I have not heard of at all, that I didn't know existed, commented on my post and were like, hey, I'm also German. I'm also, I moved to Florida. Let's connect. And that person actually became like a friend that I met in person then, kind of like even a mentor to me. And that experience then motivated me to get way more involved on LinkedIn. So during my college time ongoing, then I would just create a lot of content on LinkedIn. I would use LinkedIn. I would network with LinkedIn. I would get internships through LinkedIn. And when it came to, later stage of my college career, when I wanted to kind of explore the tech industry and see how that like just feels to be inside of and how working in tech is, LinkedIn was very obviously for me like one of the big places that I would have wanted to work on, and kind of like a dream company to work for, right? And actually the first time I applied, I just got instant denied. And then I did another internship instead. And then the next year I applied again. And then I got the internship with LinkedIn. And that was in my last year of college. And that went well. That was a really fun internship and a really cool time. And they paid very nicely for internships too, which I thought was very interesting. And every time I'm going back to Germany, that's always a like discussion too. And then got a return offer and started January 2022 working with LinkedIn in Chicago.
Yeah, and they're straightly within sales, correct?
Yes. So that was, basically it's a little complicated. They have like a rotational program, which is called Business Leadership Program, that is meant to put you then, at least one of the pathways that I did, so they have different pathways in it, is going to put you in a sales development role, which then after would turn into an account executive role, and so on, right?
Yeah. But for me, when I listen to you and what you say and so on, I think it all comes back again to curiosity and also intrinsic motivation. Am I wrong?
Yeah. I think when one thing I've learned from one of my managers and also mentors, his name is Joey Zumaya at LinkedIn, and then also my mentor Samantha Tobin at LinkedIn. What they shared with me is that they think one of the very important values that someone can have is be confidently curious, right? And I thought that was really interesting, and I think that's something I've been doing. But after I learned that from them and speak about them, that's something I really try to focus on too. To always be curious, ask questions, try to again learn new things, and be confident with it too, right? Like, because I think asking questions, being curious, that all takes confidence, right? And really thinking about that, worst cases, really that you just get a no or whatever it would be, right? But that if you don't ask, you will never get the answers to questions you might have, right?
Yeah, that is true. And you just entered a new path, right? The entrepreneurship. So I think what you just mentioned is quite on the point, or also a different perspective, right? So moving from big tech to entrepreneurship, it's not naive, it's confidently curious.
Exactly.
This is also a really great phrase, I would say.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it is, because no, it's not naive to work from to move away from like a super nicely paid job with all the benefits that everyone wants to have, to making zero in the next day. No, it's been really fun, and I can speak about that for a second too. Like, so I was, I started LinkedIn in January 2022, and then I worked with them until like March, really, like 2023. So 1 or 2 months ago is when I then left them. And besides LinkedIn being a really cool company and doing a lot of cool stuff, and like again really nicely being paid, and also getting all the benefits and insurance and like free food and like office in the Empire State Building, all of the cool stuff. What I just had a disconnect with at this time, at least in my life, is just being part of such a large organization, with LinkedIn having 20,000 employees, and then Microsoft obviously having 200,000 plus employees, right? and me just wanting to be in a place where I feel like if I do a really great job in whatever job I'm doing, right, I really want to see the impact of that too, right? And that was the point where I was thinking about initially joining a startup. And then while having conversations with startup founders and like people I've known, but also new people that I've met, that's really where I came to the realization, like, hey, like that kind of motivated me to realize, like, hey, those people I'm talking to you, they have very similar stories and very similar ideas and motivations and experiences than I had. Why don't I just try for the next 9, 10, 11 months and kind of use my savings that I made from the at LinkedIn to do so, and build something by myself, right? At least try to build something by myself and see how that goes. Because corporate and sales and whatever you do is like most likely always going to be there, right? And worst case, I can't pay rent anymore, and someday, like, I can go back to that. That was the idea. And that's when I then started building my own ideas and seeing how I can provide value the best, but by myself instead of being part of a large organization.
Yeah, and how's it going so far?
It's going good, and I guess I can explain what I'm doing a little bit too. So basically, I'm doing like two separate things. One is I'm working on like just ideas that I've always had, right, but never really had the time, or at least never prioritized the time to spend on, right? And I bet you understand that with like having a job and having a family and having, doing this podcast, it's like so difficult sometimes. At least for me, it was to do everything to the amount that you tell yourself that you want to do it, right? Quality wise or even quantity wise. That I just felt like I need to do this right now. If I really want to spend time on my ideas, I want to give them like a lot of focus. And I personally just wasn't necessarily able to do that doing LinkedIn as well as working on my own ideas. Because it might have, I tried it. It was just like not for me. And so that is one thing that I'm trying to figure out right now. What ideas make the most sense for me? What do I want to focus on? What am I most passionate about? What makes the most like sense in general? And the second part is I thought about, okay, how can I, from my experiences, like moving to the US, like working in tech, doing the internships I did, the experience I had, working in sales, how can I provide the most value, right? And so basically, I combined that with thinking about, okay, what am I also passionate about in general, and what do I do in my everyday life anyways? And that really came down to like three kind of like groups of people that I always was passionate about, which is one, small, medium businesses, right? Kind of like we talked already about this in this chat. Two, students, and three, really early career professionals, right? Especially for me being a first generation college student, which means the first of my family going to college, and also first generation American, the first of my family being American and living here and stuff. I had to figure out a lot during college as a student, and a lot even when I started my first job at LinkedIn, right? So I thought for those two like groups of people, I really would like to give value. So in addition to the small, medium businesses, so what I created is Believe It Today, which is my company. And what I'm really doing is like for those three separate groups of people, just providing different kinds of services. So for small, medium businesses, I help them create their LinkedIn presence. And for students, I try to work with educational institutions to teach or mentor students on how to utilize LinkedIn to build a personal brand for themselves, kind of going back from my experience myself. And then when it comes to early career professionals, it's really something that I'm building right now, where I realize there's some people that reached out to me that are early in their career that want to know, like, how do I become the top rep when I first start my sales role? How do I get promoted? How do I get internships? How do I get this and that? Where I realized I could bring value in a coaching environment, right? That I'm exploring right now. So those are like the three things that I'm building right now, and they might be a little confusing, but yeah, I'm really just still at the beginning, but it's exciting so far.
Yeah, no, I bet it is yeah, exciting, right? Because I mean, everyone who's watching or listening to this, I think everyone can feel the passion for it, right? And I think having the passion for something and then using that or building the business, his or her business on it, I think this is the right setup for success, and whatever success will be, right? But no, we are really curious. Let's see what's coming out. Maybe a different from a different perspective. So do you remember, how did you feel when you realized and then also decided to quit and to start something by yourself?
So for me, it was a little special situation because when I started, so kind of like I told you, I came from that background studying entrepreneurship, doing a lot of entrepreneurship things in college, then understanding, oh, sales is very similar to entrepreneurship. I want to learn as much sales as I can. But I always knew, and that was the case even when I started at LinkedIn, I always knew at some point I wanted to like transition into entrepreneurship and take my sales skills that I then hopefully learned and apply them to entrepreneurship, right? That thought was always there, right? However, what did happen, and that was what my like created some funky emotions, was that it just happened way faster than I thought, right? I don't know exactly what I had in mind, but it was definitely more of like, okay, maybe I'm in sales for like 2-3 years, maybe I go to LinkedIn and then to a different organization or maybe a startup, and then at some point I start my own thing, right? But that I now do it after like 12, 13 months. That is definitely something that wasn't really planned, right? But something that just felt like the right thing to do. And even now, 2.5 months or so in, it still definitely is, I think, the right thing that I did, right? But to actually answer your question, it made me feel excited in the first place. But secondly, also, it's definitely a little scary because you have to do everything yourself, right? Like you have to like motivate yourself. There's no person that tells you those are your goals, A, B, C. That's what you have to achieve. That's your quota. And secondly, you also have to take care of all the logistics and everything yourself, right? So for me, that was I had to get health insurance. I had to like start a company, LLC. I had to figure out legal stuff. I had to get all of those, like I had to get a business banking account, like all of those kind of things, right? And then thirdly, it is really, well, the income thing is also part of it, right? Like I went from like making really, oh, my screen is just funky. I went from making like really nice money, especially right after college, for like a 23-year-old or what, to now going to zero, right? Luckily, I started now working already with clients and stuff and like get some income through that. But yeah, I also obviously have to figure that out. Like, how do I pay rent? How do I do this and that? What was a good place for me was like obviously being at LinkedIn for a year and now being able to also use those savings that I have, right? But yeah, to short answer your question, it was exciting, but also scary.
Yeah. No, I'm also wondering, so entrepreneurship, right? Something new, something scary, doesn't have to be, but for you in the beginning, what was your approach to entrepreneurship per se? But also, did you have or do you have a structured plan? And what does structured means? Is there any, or how is it with you?
So I'll just speak about my idea part, right? So again, there's like the ideas that I'm working on and then the, consulting that I'm working on. For the consulting, it was very much like, the idea and the structure there was like, okay, what are the experiences and services that I can offer that make the most sense to a certain target audience, right? Which I then figured out with as small, medium businesses, students or slash educational institutions, and and also early career professionals, right? And then really just build that slowly and figure out, okay, how does work? How does pricing work? All of those kind of things. How, like, who do I know in that industry and all of that stuff. And that's still ongoing. For the ideas, it's a little more like wild. But for me right now, what I'm doing, and I think this helps me a lot, and I would recommend others that have certain ideas, or maybe multiple ideas, or maybe even just one idea that they really like to do as well, is really write that idea down. Maybe I just have literally a Word document, and then try to find the different things that are important about building a business or that idea, right? Like, for example, like target audience, or like, for example, competitors, or all of those kind of things, and just do a bunch of research. And that's really what I'm doing right now. I have like maybe 7-8 different documents, like individual Word documents for each idea that I have, and then those subtitles with like target audience, finances, competitors, and then I just try to do a lot of research. I think competitors is the biggest one in there so far, from my experience. And what I'm trying to really figure out right now is, can I find as much information as possible to figure out if like spending my focus on that idea can be successful, and if what I'm trying to do also is already out there, or if not, if that even makes sense to people out there, if that will be a value add, right? Because if it's not, well, first of all, it's out there already, and I just do the same thing, then it's kind of like not the point, right? And then secondly, if it's not out there, but what I'm trying to do is actually not something people are interested in, then it's also just wasted energy, right? But yeah, those are like the big things that I'm trying to do right now.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. For example, maybe from my experience, I'm not a founder yet, right? So I don't have the experience as you do. But for example, when it came to, do I start a podcast? How do I approach it? What I want to talk about? Stuff like that, right? I think it took me, I think 3 months or so, or 4 months,
Yeah.
from to transition from just thinking from the theory into really doing it. And what helped me was basically just posting something on LinkedIn saying, here it is, every Friday new episode, and that was it, right?
No, that's good.
Yeah.
And you're a founder,
so
a founder of this podcast.
that's also great. Yeah, that's a good perspective. We are almost at the end of our conversation, right? But I have maybe last question from my side. Self-awareness, self-reflection, mental health, recharging, purpose. Buzzword bingo or what?
Are you asking which word of those like comes to mind right now when you say them? That is kind of interesting to me. Or you mean just like that those?
The question, or the words and the question are said with intention like that. So just curious about your thoughts on this statement or question.
Okay. Just to clarify again, like, do you want me to, like, because you're right, like, those are buzzwords, right? Do you want me to, like, comment on if I think those are, what I think of those words, if they're just buzzwords, or if there's, like, a lot of meaning behind them, or, like, that kind of, like, route?
Yes.
Yeah? Well, I think it depends, right? I think with, like, everything, if you do, like, there's obviously in all of those, in mental health and the other words you said, there's like a lot of good things in it and a lot of good value in it, right? But I do think with anything really in life, if you do it too much, it can be negative, right? And it can have negative consequences on things, right? And I do think that, for example, words like mental health sometimes nowadays, in my opinion, get used as buzzwords, and also get used as sometimes even just like, how would I put it? Sometimes as like excuses for certain things, right? Not always, definitely not always, but in some scenarios where it's like, just get overused. That's what I'm trying to say. Sometimes they get overused where it's actually something else that is behind it, but mental health is a buzzword. It comes to mind, and then that gets used in the wrong context and therefore misused, which is not good to the people that actually, are, for example, suffering from mental health issues and so on, right? but secondly, also, I don't think helpful to the individual that is overusing that word, right? Because if you're misdescribing what is happening, right, or if you're kind of just categorizing that in the wrong bucket, right, then it's obviously very difficult to solve the things that are going on, right? Because you're focused on something that it might not be, right?
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing your thoughts on this one. Yeah, thank you very much, Skylar. As mentioned, we are at the end of our conversation. I really enjoyed it. At least for me, it was inspirational, and just do it. But maybe over to you for the last words.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me. This was super exciting. I'm always happy to share, what I've learned, and also talk to other founders like yourself, right? So that's always exciting for me. What I can just say, from if you've listened until now and you've learned anything, I would strongly recommend any young people, really anyone, really, to just be confidently curious, to look what's out there, to be okay with, being a little bit out of your comfort zone. I'm not trying to tell you that you should move to a different continent tomorrow, right? Because I also acknowledge that that is something that I do that takes a lot of sacrifice too, right? And not everyone is supposed to do that, and not everybody is gonna be fine with that and have a good life doing that, right? Even for me, like I shared, it was a lot of hardship and difficulties with that. But try to find in your own realm things how you can step 1 step, 2 steps slowly out of your comfort zone, and see how you enjoy doing that. Maybe you will discover that there's something really cool out there that you want to look more into.
Great last words, Skylar. Really appreciate it. No, but thank you again. It was really nice talking to you, and hope to see you soon, hopefully in Munich.
Yeah, let's do it. I really want to come to Munich. Oktoberfest this year would be great.
Clichés beiseite, Cappuccinos on me. Take care,
Let's
Skylar.
do it. Bye, Christian.